All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's session. And this session is meant to be an overview of, as the other sessions are, of a particular working group. And today's focus is on the Access, Equity, and Sovereignty Working Group. And again, the PowerPoint and the link to this recording, if you're in the Zoom session, will be sent to you most likely tomorrow, as well as a survey. And if you're viewing this outside of the live presentation, um, we will drop us a note so we can follow up with you on any interest you may have in joining one of these working groups or more. You can join more than one working group, of course. So welcome. And I'm glad you're here with us. There we go. So this is what we'll cover in the hour. We really try to keep mindful and be respectful of your time in this regard. So we'll be here for about an hour, and what we will do is present information, but by no means does this mean that this is not an interactive session. So again, any questions at any time, drop it in the chat. Again, feel free to take yourself off mute and ask a question right on out. All right. So in order to frame where we are and where we're going, we need to look back at where we've been, which is really the foundation of the work that has led to our current framework. So right at the beginning stages of the pandemic, way in the way back of April and May of 2020, as we were learning and hearing on our local news, national news, things like food, global food supply is breaking down. We're seeing and hearing reports, evidence in our own communities of food pantries and food banks, seeing a sudden increase in demand for food, which is then known that those households are newly food insecure, or previous households that had food insecurity. The problem was even more magnified. So the project that formed the phase one of the work that we're entering, what we call phase two, was initiated by a group of Western New York funders that created the Western New York COVID-19 Community Response Fund. And as they were providing direct assistance to food banks, food pantries, and other service providers that were meeting the sudden and magnitude increase of need, stepping back and wondering, what is this food system that we hear being spoken of? Why are we now also seeing in Western New York empty store shelves? So how is the global food supply breakdown that we're hearing about obviously impacting us in Western New York? Where's the food? And at the same time, we were witnessing farmers markets at the, trying to create creative, touchless, contactless models of operating under very strict emergency provisions by ag and markets, but that also people were circumventing farmers markets and going right to the farm because they knew that that's where farms had food. So it was just a ripple and multiplier effect. The funding pool appropriated a grant that supported finding out really where and how the impacts were connected in Western New York. So with a partnership of NYSOG and the Western New York Foundation, we were able to issue an RFP and contracted with a team of consultants made up of 4 individuals from various expertise and various representations. And it was a little difficult in the first part of COVID when they couldn't travel, but over the course of nearly 2 years, 18 plus months, they spent an enormous amount of time in Western New York, learning, assessing, and not looking just at food insecurity, but of course, taking a systems approach, pulling back, understanding the assets, understanding the gaps, understanding the unmet opportunities, and understanding the multiple diversities, the multiple different geographies of Western New York. And they were charged, as we were charged with the funders, to not only do a deep dive assessment that was highly participatory, but also the end result should be a deliverable that was a plan that wasn't a plan that sits on a shelf. It was a plan for action. Throughout this entire process, as we were charged with the funder, and it's a non-negotiable element that throughout the assessment and throughout generating the consultant-led recommendations, that equity was a primary lens through which all the other parts of the food system were examined. So we have to understand who does not have equal agency, also historic and systemic issues preventing equity policy. And that is the lens that framed not only the assessment, but that also frames all of the work going forward. So through that experience, this is an expert from the final report. The final report was revealed at an event at the very end of September. And then we grabbed a quote from this, and I think it underscores the need for that assessment. And it was the first time ever that the region was looked at as a food system. We've had county level efforts, we've had even community level efforts, or a tri-county effort, pulling back to look at Western New York, which is usually defined in 8 counties, but we also added Monroe as the 9th county. The footprint was the 9 counties for multiple reasons, several of which being looking at the food banks, where the emergency food banks that serve the food pantries were located and who they served. So Feed More Western New York serves, I believe, 4 counties in the western part of the Western New York area, and Food Link out of Rochester, Monroe County, serves the remaining 5 counties of Western New York, as well as Monroe. I believe that's accurate. So it was very important that we account for not only the food bank's location and service areas, but also the cultural exchange of assets between the region's 2 primary urban areas, Buffalo and Rochester. We have communities, new arrivals, we've got diversities, we've got higher education, academia, we've got cross collabs with urban garden programs, urban farms. So it was important that we add Monroe. So that's our footprint, 9 counties, and we don't ever want Monroe County or our Monroe County constituents to feel like they are the add-on. It's a footprint of 9 counties, and that's also another non-negotiable part of our work. So leading into where we are today, we were delivered or left with quite a few things with the consultant's work. Not only do we have a comprehensive final report, and as I said, we've got a board member who diligently counted, they're not enumerated in the report, but they diligently counted 144 distinct recommendations. And the assessment created the collaborative network model. So we have a model of a regional leadership team and 5 working groups that were established during the assessment, and they're all populated by local stakeholders from within those areas. And we have sets of recommendations that are consultant written, but the consultants didn't write or deliver this report in a vacuum. All the participants, which were hundreds of people who met regularly and frequently, in addition to site visits and other sources of interaction with the consultants to the folks of Western New York, we have they all contributed to the draft. So nothing was really a surprise. It was sets of recommendations that were validated and supported by the participants. So that's really another thing to make sure that we understand. Again, building equity, building empowerment and ownership was reflected all the way through with the consultant's methodology, and will so continue going forward with ours. So very broadly, there are sets of findings, and very broadly, those are the opportunities for the region. The collaborative framework that I mentioned looks somewhat like this, and this is my juvenile attempt of making circles and ovals and putting text in it. But the collaborative framework shows that NYSOG, who we represent, and interacted during the assessment phase and going forward with a leadership team. It was formerly called the Regional Advisory Council, about 20 to 22 people who were really closely connected with the consultants throughout to be the first level or second level sounding board, input provider, connector to other people through their various networks. And from the leadership team and consultants and partners, we grew actually first 4 working groups, and then the participants, each working group was facilitated, 4 working groups, because we had 4 consultants and each consultant facilitated a working group. But then participants were empowered to set mission and goals for each working group and chart the course. And it was found very quickly that there needed to be a 5th working group for a particular issue that really transcends all of the working groups, and that was infrastructure, the physical infrastructure needed to build a food system. But back in the early part of convening, it was evident that we needed to build consensus about why we were convening and doing the work of this assessment, knowing that we would lead, it would be for naught, that there would be a phase 2 and multiple phases in perpetuity. So basic operating principles, so that all participants were at a point where we could agree that these were, again, non-negotiable points that are guiding our work. So Dr. Samina Raja, who is on the regional leadership team and also participated on multiple working groups, led us through, and I mean the whole collective, through several sessions to come down to these, again, participant-derived and informed operating principles, of which we're carrying forward to the Food Future Western New York work. And first and foremost is that in all of our work, we do establish and embody our justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion principles. And if you don't know what that means, or if you have a vague understanding of how those are applied to the food system, any portal that you participate in our work as a partner, working group member, regional leadership team, maybe you'll be on the newly formed, soon to be newly formed Food and Racial Equity Council. We will provide wraparound supports, information, education, and real life examples of what that looks like in action in relationship to food system functions. And that we're not doing this to keep doing this again and again for the same issues, that we are geared and wired to work toward action. And that's going to be really where a lot of the work rests for the working groups. And because we do have access to so many research facilities, higher education institutions, and individual researchers who are out in the field, and organizations like Field and Fork Network that are gathering and generating data, that we build our action plan based on data that exists, or we work to gather data and to inform our plans. And that leads to the fact that we are creating a very specific action-oriented response so that we don't have to keep, so it's not a Band-Aid policy, and that everything we do promotes economic development as well as economic and food sovereignty. So why this collaborative network? Real quickly, I like this quote from the Aspen Institute that they are really key high-functioning networks. And perhaps you've seen the visual of networks. They look like, a snowstorm, right? There are all these little points that often look like stars, and there are all these little threads and lines connecting, and you're like, wait, what? The goal is basically to visualize that we are all connected through, what did the 7 degrees of separation or whatever it was. We're all connected through first, second, third, and even farther degrees of connection, but that we need to work, but building the collegiality among those connections, no matter how far removed, will be the strength of working towards sustainable change. So of the 3 models that the Aspen Institute put forth, we are a collaborating network. We knew that before this report came out by the Aspen Institute. Lot of reasons why that we established this in phase 1, that we know that this is the way to work toward foundational, right? You have to be a strong foundation and long-term change. And that we adopt the collective impact model as NYSOG's role, where we will be the backbone organization, and whereby we are all agreeing to come together wearing our different roles, representing our different organizations, but that we have agreed to a shared agenda, would be the work on the priorities under Food Future, and that we're working not to just benefit our own organization, but to rise up everybody, and that we have transparency of communications, and that we have the backbone organization and staff of NYSOG to support not only the work of Food Future and the working groups, but any work that comes out that needs additional research and maybe pipeline funding development. So that's those are some of the key functions. And if you notice, I did not highlight that at the very end, they have the highest level of risk, but they have the greatest chance for systems change. The reason why I left highest level of risk is that risk is primarily in, how do I want to say, fatigue. Networks take a lot of, this is like daycare, right? They take a lot of oversight, a lot of loving care and understanding. So that's often what happens, is that there may be fatigue. We're not tired. We've been resting up for this. We're ready to go. So that's just a little overview of the framework. And it's important to understand this framework. So historic framework under the consultancy, we had a group of 21 people from around the region. And if you visit our project website, foodfuturewny.org, there's tabs where you can see who were our advisory council members and who were the folks that worked really hard on the legacy version of our working groups. But both of these were set up not only to create this participatory framework, but also to act as the think tanks for our scale team of consultants. So of course, as consultants, they needed to really understand information from the community level, from the cultural level, from the racial diversity level, from the lived experience level. And so created this tiered framework, not only to provide their information that inform their consultancy and recommendations, but also to start forging those relationships that would sustain from the change from the consultancy to now implementation. So in the recommendations, the consultants have not only provided very specific recommendations and priorities and action steps that fall along each of those 5 working group themes, but they've suggested recommendations for organizational. So the framework and the entity NYSOG that is been funded to be the backbone support organization. So that the regional leadership team, we changed the name from the RAC to the leadership team, and that this leadership team morphs into more of a stronger leadership and decision-making role. So we're saying that the interplay of the regional leadership team with the NYSOG board and staff and the working groups and the soon-to-be developed Food and Racial Equity Council, that they're kind of almost the board of directors of a lot of that project work. So the relationship between the RLT and the WGs will be strong, and also with support to the RLTs, WGs by equity consultants, staff, and board. And that on the RLTs, we increase the representation of farmers, of food businesses, and farm worker and labor orgs. The first version of the RLTs, we had a group of 21 amazing folks who were had been pioneers or innovators in a lot of the key areas that the consultants were really interested in gathering information. We'd like to diversify representation on the RLT to be more reflective also of people who have more varied and lived experience in the direct elements of the food system. And then, of course, that we ensure representation on not just the RLT, but all of the functions and groups convened under Food Future. Remember, this is a 9-county service footprint, and our participants are drawn from at least the 9 counties. We've had interest from outside of the 9 counties for people to participate. And yes, that's absolutely welcomed as well. But we're here today to talk about the working groups. So the consultants have underscored multiple places in their final report that the working groups are the most important structural component to assure that the Food Future Western New York initiative remains bottom up, real folks living the real experience in the food system and locally rooted, meaning we're really looking for sustainable change to our constituencies, even down to a census tract level, to a county level, to a multiple county level, to the whole region. And that we give the working group some autonomy and some money. So we have done that with our funding stream, and that we provide and promote more cross collaboration among the working groups. And we said we like to think of the working groups as a flexible living document. So these are the 5 working groups that we ended that consultancy with, and we are relaunching under the Food Future Western New York work, collaborative network work. Remember that? And those are the brief mission statements. So like I said, we had working groups, originally 4, now 5. Each was facilitated by a consultant who acted as the meeting convener, agenda setter in partnership with the participants, priorities, vetting information. All of that will be maintained right now with our staff. And as we've got funding to bring in consultants and trainers and other as needed folks, the working groups will have support, but also know that these aren't static, that these 5 working groups, and it was hard to, we know food does not know geopolitical borders, and neither does it know, well, this topic stays right here because it's related to farmers. Well, farmers need to sell food, so we need to talk about the markets and who's buying the food. And then, of course, well, who's buying the food, who doesn't have access to that food, and where isn't equity. There's, disequity, not just in access, but who's not being able to own land to make the food that needs to be, so obviously we can, as participants, work through their roles in the working groups. We are all open to revising, reorganizing, creating ad hoc sub-working groups out of any of these. That's how the infrastructure came. It was a subgroup of the markets and buyers, and it's now still as a standalone group. Or we could even consider blending 2 or 3 or whatever. So again, this is not a top-down directive. This is a framework that is a living representation of the need and opportunities and assets. We have a lot of assets that we often stagnate here in Western New York, that we're not leveraging to build the equity, to build parity and relationship across the whole food system. And just as an FYI, we define the food system, and I don't want to say as I was pointed out recently, that sounds monolithic, like the global system. We should be working to build a food system here in Western New York that is right-sized for us. So I liked that differentiation, that we're working to build a food system that is right-sized for Western New York. So where do we begin? So that's why we're here today. So of those 5 working groups, we are at the point of relaunching. We're reaching out to the legacy participants, as well as welcoming a whole host of people newly interested in coming into the work. Where do we begin? We begin, we hope to schedule those first quote unquote official meetings mid to end of August. And we'll start conversations based on 2 points of foundation, I guess. Each working group developed a mission, priority focus areas, and a list of priorities that they were working on under the consultants, plus dropping in the sets of recommendations from the report. So each working group, we will launch with we'll reformat it, kind of a list. This is the amalgamation of what has been recommended, and we'll facilitate conversation in those first few meetings around where are we now. So all of this work was released in September. We received funding announcement and commitment at the end of December. And we've taken these last few months to build our internal staffing capacity. We're ready. This is where we start, but we are the guiders, the participants of the working groups, the RLTs, our consultants that will be coming on shortly are the guide, are not the guiders, they're the doers, they're the action and priority setters. So the Access, Equity, and Sovereignty Working Group was originally called, I believe it was food equity or something like that, when the consultants developed the original 4 placeholder working group titles. Very quickly into the meetings, the participants worked through a lot of process and felt that renaming it to Access, Equity, and Sovereignty better reflected the priority focus of what this group was really established to look at. Access, who has access to food, who hasn't, and why, who has what groups of people, based on what indicators may have new barriers or insecurity, why, or what do we need to understand so that we can learn to respond appropriately about systemic racism and disenfranchisement in Western New York. Equity, and sovereignty, understanding that we've got diverse cultures and indigenous communities that have self-determined and need to have recognition that they have self-determination in setting priority food types and sources relevant to their cultural and historic diets. So the mission of the Access, Equity, and Sovereignty, and I'll just say AES shortly to shorten it, is to advance food equity. That's a big bucket in the Western New York food system by identifying and better understanding programs, policies, systems, structures, and practices that contribute to barriers of inclusion and food access locally and regionally. So remember, locally could be at a county level or a neighborhood level, or even a particular community level, and regionally would be that 9-county footprint. The agenda or mission of the AES tasks and initiatives are to increase food security, contribute to community food sovereignty. And I believe when this is live, there's a link that expands out to explain what food sovereignty is, and to ensure that the Regional Advisory Council, now renamed the RLT, represents basic values, that goes back to those operating principles, that demonstrate highest standards to respect JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, as described in the guiding principles. So the group legacy members are listed there, but they had ongoing tasks and initiatives. Those will be, there was work made toward those during the consultancy, but that will be those points listed plus the ones that we're going to review here will be the foundation to start the conversations. And remember that well, maybe not remember, we haven't said it yet. The working groups will be a place to learn from each other, respect each other, but also together set actions. So whereas under the consultancy, it was discussion centric, information sharing, understanding. We're creating the place for that as well as action. So very, very high level, not very high level, I guess this is more specific. All of these are listed in the full final report, which is on our foodfuturewny.org website. We've just taken the findings, summarized findings and recommendations, summarized them a little bit into digestible PowerPoint bullets, but know that there is extractive information that supports each of these findings. These are just the high level takeaway. So for access, equity, and sovereignty, that most people associated with the consultancy agree that emergency food planning process could be or should be more inclusive. I'm not going to read everything coming up. There's a lot of action steps, but I'm hoping that the slide is up for you to get an understanding of the focus and mission of the work under the Food Future work for the Access, Equity, and Sovereignty Working Group. And remember, we were still in quite a bit of the height of the pandemic where we couldn't be in the same space with each other, but we still needed services and emergency food. We needed to interact with farmers. So some of these findings were through that lens, such as there's been an increase in mutual aid networks where residents trade among themselves. I also want to acknowledge that the consultants they were contracted to end and conclude their official research and interaction with participants. The contract was June 30th. Then with several months of follow-up and drafting and review, the final report was released in this past September. 2 months before the conclusion, well, less than 2 months, 6 weeks before the conclusion of their work, the racist massacre occurred at Tops in East Buffalo. So there are references to that, but just framing that so much of the environment of food security and access in East Buffalo did shift. So a lot of the work that the consultants had based their findings and recommendations on were primarily impacted by witnessing what COVID's response was, but they've also acknowledged to the best that they could, a few weeks before everything was concluded, what they witnessed occurring and documented in East Buffalo and beyond and still maintains as an impact from the racist massacre, which ties into systemic racism. So I just want to put that lens on there, and we can get into more discussions too on this. And remember, this isn't static. These findings were, as a result of the work almost 2 years ago. So some aren't as relevant, some may be more pressing, but we definitely have a good foundation to build on. And the digital divide, the very last one in Western New York, not just in Buffalo, because we heard that again and again and again in Buffalo, but pull back into the rural areas, and there is a digital divide of a similar magnitude. And then a lot of the work coming forward in these next slides will be focused on the second one from the bottom, healthy food priority areas. And again, remember, this is just suggested starting points. So here are the 6 very primary goals for this particular working group. And remember, I keep saying remember, and I don't remember if I've said it again. The working groups aren't out there swimming alone. The working groups will be facilitated. A majority, I believe, we're predicting, as we saw during the assessment, of work research will come outside of the meetings. So that would be supported by staff, consultants, members that say, hey, you know what, I will take on, this fact finding, or hey, I will reach out to. So all of that will be worked out through the process of onboarding and getting into the work. Again, not negotiable. Establish food and racial equity as an integral part of this work across 9 counties. Establish a food and racial equity fund within any broader funding pools that are suggested to be developed to equip BIPOC leaders. And if you don't know what BIPOC means, that's Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC leaders with skills to advance racial equity in the food system. And that's really important. That BIPOC leaders, representatives of various diversities and communities, lead their communities that they represent. We've seen how many decades and decades of top-down decision and policy making that didn't include the people who, or communities that it was supposed to be intended for. So that I really want to bring that differentiation forward, that this is empowerment. Campaigns, charters, action plans to increase number of producers. I guess I am reading all of these because I think they're very important. Facilitate. Remember, we're facilitating, but we're empowering leaders, empowering through support, access to funding, access to other partners. Map and create HFPAs. And if you don't know what a healthy food priority area is, just very high level, if you've ever worked in or heard any type of planning terms, such as we used to have empire zones. I don't know if we have empire zones anymore, where an area was footprinted, sadly, not unlike redlining, but this is the opposite. So an area was footprinted that had exceptional need for investment versus, unfortunately, redlining, where it was disinvestment. So the consultants identified many areas in the Rochester Buffalo and even Southern Tier area, neighborhoods or communities that really had some chronic and pressing issues, that if it could be agreed that that footprint of an area was dedicated HFPA, that it would be more seamless for programs and leaders to leverage investment targeted for that area. So it's like almost like an opportunity zone, for another planning term, of where federal monies have been invested. But this would be investment, yes, potentially infrastructure with maybe more stores and such, but the investment with outcomes that change the health indicators of the people, businesses in that area. A lot more discussion on this, but I really think that's an exciting avenue that we can all work toward. And then we want to create wealth through the food system, and that we want to organize a regional food sovereignty partnership. So the next slides will be the suggested action steps to fulfill each of those goals under the Access, Equity, Sovereignty Working Group. And again, remember, it's not a working ladder like, hey, here you are now, go do it. Absolutely not. And we're not doing it all. These are summaries. I really encourage you to look at the report, and there are specific businesses, organizations, partners in Buffalo, Rochester, Western New York that are named as partners for a lot of these bulleted decisions that Food Future and the working groups need to or should connect with, and also need to and should support. So there's a lot of mutuality and reciprocity in this. And I do want to preface this work by saying that NYSOG's goal is to be the support, the administrative entity. We had, how do I want to say this? It's not a proprietary project. This is a project of the stakeholders and constituencies of Western New York. We're here to help support the leadership, evolution, and collective work toward achieving these, and that we don't have to do all these bullet points. The working groups can establish what's realistic. So establish food and racial equity. That's, again, that is the primary lens, not only for this working group to advance, but all of the work. Establish a food and racial equity council. There's a lot more that I could fill probably 2 hours, but part of our funding, based on the consultant's recommendation, is that a new body be developed, and that is called a Food and Racial Equity Council. The consultants didn't give a suggestion like, oh, an optimal number would be maybe 7 people, or it could be 127. We also have the strong suggestion to bring in an equity consultant to help on several key points. So the consultant suggested, and our funders really felt that this was, and again, I agree, we do too, a unique approach that hasn't been done in too many places. So the consultant suggested that, I think they called it the Food and Racial Equity Team, and then shortened it to FRET. I changed the word to council. We can call it whatever the participants would like to call it. That body would meet not terribly frequently, maybe quarterly, but it would be in part a body of people that would audit, sounds like a hard word, but that would assess through the lens of the operating principles and JEDI how we're all doing, and suggest maybe we need to reorient our communications to be more representational. Maybe we're doing something really, really exceptional, and how do we get that word known out to a broader area. So we've talked about this with a couple of our partners on how this could be developed, and it will be developed in partnership with an equity consultant. We've got a couple that we're hoping to bring into consideration of a contract. But this is something new that, as far as we've concerned, we've talked with folks in academia. There have not been too many documented functions of a group like this. So we're still figuring it out. And I'll have to say that about a lot of this work. I can't tell you, or our staff can't tell you what it will be, because this is living work. This is empowered work. So, and if you're interested in learning more, or even informing us with your input on various roles or various candidates that this council could consider, we're open. We welcome all input. And that we just develop a decision-making criteria for all of the work under the food system, that to assure that equity is a priority in decision-making process on new investments. And they wrote new investments, and I would say for any investments, right? And implementing equitable organizational policies. Again, those are just the bullets of very extractive explanations on how our partners can achieve the big green bubble through tasks. And we can add as many other bullets or refine this as possible. And that so of course the consultants have charged that all of the partners go out and find a lot of money, right? So we're working on that too, to develop funds that can be used as investments, and that we look specifically to, as I said, equipping BIPOC leaders with the skills to advance racial equity in the food system. And of course, there are many, as I said, the report has much fuller information. Oh, wait a minute, I should say it's East Buffalo, not East Buffalo, and suggested organizations to work with. And that gives us a good place to start. I mean, there are organizations that maybe don't exist anymore, and I'm sure there are many new organizations or entities, or even informal organizations like neighborhood groups that we need to be aware of and connect with. So, yeah. The third one, so campaigns, charters, action plans, that's a whole lot of, each is different, each is a lot of work, but basically we're looking at moving toward bringing people together, establishing unified communications or vision, or move toward policy change, and then blast it out to the world so everybody knows what we're doing. But land access is a huge barrier, whether you're in, especially we in the rural areas hear this all the time, but understanding that access to land to farm in urban or peri-urban areas is just as critically challenging. And that oftentimes, whether you're rural, suburban, peri-urban, urban, you may have access to land, but you have no ownership pathway, thereby jeopardizing your long-term ability to grow food. So a lot of different groups that are already in the arena, that are on the fringe, that we can, through this Access, Equity, and Sovereignty Working Group and the Farmers and Producers Working Group, land access is an issue too. Work toward maybe coming up with a couple of actions that we want to work on short-term change. And again, the other thing too is that I think I've said we don't have to, obviously 144 discrete recommendations. We know that this is not going to, how do we want to say this, change the food system in the 9-county footprint in 3 months. That would be foolish to even think that. This is long-term work. Networks are highly effective. Networks take a lot of loving care, and this is a broad geography region, that we have a lot of diversities outside of cultural and racial too. Even just where we live is a diversity indicator. And that what we're going to charge the working groups with looking at is that understand we can work toward, how do we want to say, a win. Let's address and put our resources together to solve or come up with a solution that is sustainable. And then we build on that point, and then we build on the next one, so that we have this plot map that's envisioned across Western New York of sustainable successes that, again, we don't have to keep going back and putting Band-Aids on, but that we can leverage more and more successes and change in the food system. And another, facilitate community engagement. So that means bring people together to map, plan, and create the healthy food priority areas. It was tough to get all of their suggested steps summarized. Again, this is very fully explained, and this is there are groups already working in this realm. And I also want to point out that the Food Future work as a network does not and will not supplant any work being done or have been done or planned to be undertaken by any organization or other network or coalition. Our hope is that the 9-county service area can incorporate those coalitions, which most often are smaller geography focused, into this work, so that all of our wider area participants are informed about the work of others that may be particular to East Buffalo, West Buffalo, East Jamestown, City Center, Rochester, and that we build our collective resources. But I do want to make sure that this is known. This work is not and will not supplant any other work. It is meant to support. And if you see and read through the report, the action items are for Food Future to invest in, Food Future to support, and there are lists of different organizations and efforts. So just want to put that out there, that looking at a 9-county footprint, looking at I'm physically situated in the southern tier, and I don't often organically have a way for information knowing what is taking place in southern Monroe, downtown Rochester, the communities in Buffalo. So this collective, collaborative network is a place for that sharing, so that we can, again, all rise up together. And wealth creation. I mean, we know the distribution of wealth is not equitable at all, or the opportunity to create wealth. So things like where it says bullet point, engage wealth creation specialists to work with our partners. Of course, that involves us going out to find more money, probably, because most wealth creation specialists are engaged through contracts. But we have our bullets, and we have our connections and networks that we can work on a lot of this collectively. Now, a lot of this also relates to our finance working group, which has been renamed Farm and Food Business Finance Working Group. So again, there's a lot of overlap, and especially opportunity. So if you've got finance folk, it's like, yeah, I want to hang out in the Farm and Food Business Finance Working Group. The goal is that the operating principles of equity, justice, diversity, inclusion are relevant and evident in across all of our working groups. So there will be opportunities to exchange knowledge and share space, primarily virtually in the beginning, among our working groups. Culturally relevant wealth communication strategies. This was really interesting, and also this point has a lot of potential for further explanation. And I like that they suggested that we acknowledge the cottage industry entrepreneurs. There are a lot of opportunity to bring products being made or developed in homes, maybe not in the appropriate kitchen to sell in retail or wholesale, but how could we leverage services to make that happen while bringing, which brings wealth opportunities, especially to BIPOC folks. Okay, so organize a regional food sovereignty partnership. We've had really strong input in the assessment phase 1 with participants from the Seneca Nation of Indians, and also understanding other groups and new communities that have very specific self-determined food preferences, and how do we understand and support that in Western New York, especially communities that may be coming from a warmer subtropical climate to, well, Western New York. So how do we build inclusion by acknowledging self-determination in food nutrition? Again, a lot of opportunity to explore. Almost done. Thank you for hanging in. So working groups, what does it mean to be on a working group? First of all, the working groups moving into phase 2 will be supported by our staff and partners. And that means staff will start as facilitators, will be the conveners, the Zoom code issuers, agenda setters in partnership in the beginning with our participants, but that we have resources available that if a working group goes, you know, we need to better understand this, can we hire a researcher? Hey, we really think that somebody with this specialty training could not only benefit us in this working group, but everybody in the working group in RLT. Is there money to support? So we've got funds, not a lot for the next 2 years, but we've got flexibility. Oh, funding coordination, and I see I left that hanging. I'll have to go back and see what that's supposed to be. Second bullet. The recommendations by the consultants were very, very strong that the working groups have financial autonomy, meaning that there's money appropriated for each of the working groups on an annual basis. I believe their original suggestion was mid 6 figures per working group per year. Well, multiply that by 5 working groups and put it in a funding proposal, and it was massaged a little bit. So we do have a pool of funds that is known as, on our line item budget, discretionary funds, primarily earmarked for the 5 working groups to access in ways such as, now remember, the access would be working groups connecting with the regional leadership team saying, hey, you know, here's this opportunity. Maybe this organization has a funding in gap, or this organization or entity needs a new piece of equipment, or maybe this, maybe that. Can we recommend a certain amount of funding from the discretionary funds be invested or injected or provided to this project or business or organization? The regional leadership team, in conjunction with the food and racial equity team, in conjunction with the NYSOG board, will review that. Now, how that protocol is being developed. Remember, we have an equity lens. We also are still waiting to get our contract with the equity consultant. That's not been finalized, but the process is envisioned to be seamless, short. So we're not talking about months and months of, well, I don't know. And this money was established by the consultants as a priority to be flexible, resilient, and reactionary to opportunities that are imminent versus having to wait maybe for an annual funding schedule by USDA and not knowing. So we're still developing that protocols. And of course, working group participants will have input to that process along with the regional leadership team. So there's still some of this work involving, there are funds, and we've been charged also to develop more funding pools. And again, all of this is on the burner, but we do have a commitment, a set of funds. Each working group participant will be eligible to receive a stipend. We paid $400 and $600 stipends in the phase 1 for the RLT and the working groups. We've got similar amount of stipends available. You don't have it. We're still developing the protocols, but we're looking at 4 months at a time. If you can, we want your input as to when is an optimal time to meet, what day of the week, what time, what the frequency feels good for you for the next 4 months. And then if you can commit to attending a majority, we'll figure out what that is, of the meetings at the end of 4 months, we automatically mail you a check. So you don't have to justify how you use it, knowing that your time is valuable. Your time appropriated for work toward this collaborative network may mean you got to run through the drive-through to get dinner for the kiddos because you're going to jump on Zoom, or you've got elder care or mileage, because we will have some in-person meetings, not too many to begin with. Yeah, and that we agree that working groups are a space to share, learn, and understand, but it's also a space for action. One of the first things we're going to drop into the working groups is to help us plan a set of learning exchanges, which is a fancy word for field visits, field trips. As the consultants did their immersive 4 and 5 day stays, multiple stays in Western New York, we created a very condensed agenda for them, and we were moving and grooving. Every hour and a half we were visiting and driving a different farm, a different urban area, a different grocer, a different processing facility, and some of the working group members and regional leadership team said, hey, can we tag along? Well, of course. The response was, oh my gosh, I would never have gone to downtown Rochester. I would never have gone to downtown Buffalo. I learned and met so much about people working in the food system. So we're setting up a schedule of we hope to do 3 full days spaced over a month and a half of self-driving, curated, because I forgot to write money in the budget for a coach bus or vans, but self-driving, but highly curated days of farm and food business stops. And this is some of the best ways for people to come into areas that they don't live in, communities that they normally would not have had an understanding or an interaction with, and especially urban folks coming in into Western or into the rural areas. So we want working groups to inform the agendas, and we'll take care. Then staff comes back and we'll take care of all the logistics and the dates on that, but we can't make those decisions autonomously. And then that we've got funding to put on a full scale regional, we'll call it conference or summit. It'll be a 1-day location to be determined, but primarily where it'll be accessible for people who may not have access to self-transportation. And we want this to be a day-long agenda of everybody being exposed to presenters, innovators, inspirers, people who are the change makers in our local food system, our regional food system, and then from beyond. So we're raising hands for that planning committee. And that you don't have to commit to be on a working group for 5 years, but know that this is not a one-off. We're really focused on committing to this work to change the system collaboratively. And then just a final quote from Chris Hartman, who was on the previous Regional Advisory Council, who is also committed to the regional leadership team. He heads up Headwater Food Hub outside of Rochester. And his experience was basically, Chris is an innovator, he's a spark plug, but he to this day will say, wow, just being even in the virtual space of people I would not have regularly interacted with or learned about, the smaller food hub in Jamestown, and then collecting, making contacts that not only benefited each of their businesses, but ultimately benefited moving food to more people. And as he said, is the initiative, the phase 1, great example of how to do that well, new connections, conversations, and collective planning. So there we are. And I neglected, I am so sorry. Our staff is on Zoom. I'll ask them to come off mute and introduce themselves. But if you're ready to join in, you will, we ask you to respond to a poll that will drop in your inbox. So please give us your email if you haven't already. And we'll have the first couple of meetings, we'll do some guidelines on group interaction. How do we get along, even if we don't see exactly the same? And how do we, that we want to agree that those 6 operating principles are, again, non-negotiable. And we'd love to have you have your business or organization be a partner, and that's no cost. There'll be a form that gives us some nuts and bolts information, and we will be morphing our website also to, our website will be morphing, but we'll have sponsor logos. And read the report. All right. Hey, staff, so come off mute and introduce yourselves. Rachel, are you there?
I can go in the meantime if that's helpful. Oh,
Hi,
Rachel.
yeah. Sorry, I apologize. Yeah, I'm the diversity manager. I started 3 months ago. Really grateful to be a part of this, and excited to see our work going forward.
Thanks. Deanna.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deanna Garwal, and I am the Program and Communications Manager here at NYSOG. Similarly to Rachel, I also started about 3 months ago. So anything regarding communication or even the email follow-up tomorrow morning, I am your girl. So excited to be here with you all.
Thank you. Kristen.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking your time to join us. I am the CEO here at NYSOG and am just wrapping up, actually, as of today, my first month on board. So this has been a great way for me to get to know some folks, and I'm really looking forward to the work ahead. So look forward to speaking with you more.
Excellent. Thank you. Anybody, I know we went over about 10 minutes, but if there's anybody that would like to come off mute, ask a quick question, we hopefully could answer it. If not, find us by email or give us a call. Any questions? Okay. Thank you, everybody. We look forward to connecting with you, and welcome to a working group. Bye-bye now.